handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEVT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us here on the Denise Simon Experience. We've got an old buddy here with us, Seton Motely at lessgovernment.org. And Seton's been doing some pretty good work here. He penned an interesting article on intellectual property. And it's a kind of a component here of where the economy and business enterprise is headed or not headed. And I think it's a consequence of some leftover kind of regulations and stuff from the previous administration. So Happy New Year, Seton. And
Happy New Year, miss. How are you?
Good. Obviously, we're losing our ranking here on intellectual property, which I think probably triggered your mind on this one. Why is it so important?
Well, of course, look, the founding fathers, even in an agrarian society where most people were farmers, understood the value of intellectual property. That's why there's the copyright clause in the Constitution. They understood, I think Abe Lincoln said, the 2 greatest inventions of all time were the printing press and the concept of protecting intellectual property. Mm-hmm. And so, we've gone, because of innovation, because of intellectual property, because of patents and trademarks and copyrights, we went from an agrarian society to an industrial society. One, because we invented industry, which had all kinds of patented ideas and that sort of thing. 2, because we invented a bunch of cool things for farmers where we could grow more food with less farmers. And so, we had 100,000 farmers in 1900, and we've got like 10,000 now. And then they're producing more food than they did 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's because we invented a bunch of cool stuff that allowed them to do that. Now we're moving from the industrial economy into the information economy. And therefore, we don't even have, there are some things that aren't even manufactured in the traditional sense anymore. Mm-hmm. You have ideas that go straight to market, like who manufactures an app for your phone? Nobody. But you have apps generating millions and millions of dollars of wealth without any, just based on the idea. And so it becomes even more important now than ever before to protect intellectual property. And of course, this information revolution is occurring all over the planet. Well, unfortunately for us, we just had 8 years of the most anti-intellectual property administration in our nation's history. Mm-hmm. Right at a very crucial time in our the evolution of the global economy. Obama was attacking it in conjunction with Congress with a dumb law in 2012 perversely called the America Invents Act, which created a board within the confines of the Patent and Trademark Office that destroys patents. The same department that gives them takes them away now. It's almost like just like, hey, we were just kidding. The patent we gave you, we were just kidding. And of course, unilaterally, because Obama was a big fan of doing things unilaterally, the executive branch was assaulting IP all over the place. The last example was on January 17th, 2017. 3 days before they were inaugurated out of office, the Obama Federal Trade Commission filed a monopoly lawsuit against Qualcomm for holding patents. Well, Denise, what's a patent?
Well,
it's a monopoly on your idea.
Yeah, it's a protection.
It's a monopoly. It's a government-sanctioned monopoly per the Constitution. So the Obama administration was suing the patent holder for holding a patent. And they were suing the patent holders for holding a lot of patents. And the problem with that is, again, because we're in a global economy, that stupid antitrust lawsuit precedent was followed up by China and South Korea and now the European Union. And this company is being fined billions and billions of dollars under antitrust law, thanks to the Obama administration precedent. And there were 7 metrics that this listing used that moved us out of the top 10. The 2 that jumped out to me were the amount of money spent on research and development and the concentration of companies working on intellectual property. And, of course, we dropped precipitously in that because Obama just declared an open season on intellectual property. Remember, he's a huge crony of the Silicon Valley, Google, Facebook, and they hate intellectual property. Google is the biggest thief of intellectual property on the planet.
Yes.
So Obama probably had an ideological predilection against intellectual property because he was a leftist, but he also had crony, crass, transactional political interest per Google and Facebook to assault intellectual property as well. So it got, after 8 years of that, we go out of the top 10 as far as being friendly and conducive to the creation of intellectual property.
When this law was passed, did Lamar Smith and I guess it was Lamar Smith and Patrick Leahy, did they understand the implications?
I don't think so. To me, the person who was most egregiously awful on intellectual property, he's actually now retiring. He's leaving Congress. His name's Darrell Issa. Darrell Issa is from California. Darrell Issa is the richest member of Congress. You know why he's the richest member of Congress? Because he invented the Viper car alarm.
Correct.
And it was actually his voice for a while. Danger, danger. That was his voice. And he became the richest man in Congress. How? He invented his car alarm, and then what did he do? He patented it. So for him to be so anti-patent after becoming the richest man in Congress because of a patent, it's just brain dead to me. I don't understand what he was thinking. And they've been working on bad laws since the America Invents Act, which we've been fortunate enough thus far to be fending off with whips and chairs. And with him leaving, I thought, well, thank God at least we have one less Republican screwing up the brand on the protection of intellectual property because he's gone. But you're right, Lamar Smith is bad too.
And so it's also called, this act is also called the Patent Reform Act.
Right, right. The Patent Deform Act is what it should be called.
Okay, that's what I wanted you to say.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of components to this. I mean, it ends up with being, a first to invent, which means you got the bigger people that can come in there and undo the little guy who invented something and got a patent. They can't afford to go up against a Google. Then you're going to end up with some trade abuse, and then we're going to tariff the thing, and then we got to license the thing, and then you got foreign intrusions, and so you got a lot of things that are happening here. So we have dropped out, but who's taking our place? I mean, who's leading?
Well,
is it China?
Well, I don't remember. I don't have the list in front of me. What's happening is, like, for example, China, of course, steals $600 to $800 billion a year.
Yeah, everything.
And one of the reasons they went after Qualcomm specifically is because they have a domestic competitor to Qualcomm called Huawei. So not only are they So what this is for them, in at least one aspect of it, is it's a huge crony play for their domestic company. Likewise, South Korea. Now, you may not have heard of Huawei, but you've probably heard of South Korea's competitor to Qualcomm. It's called Samsung. And Samsung and Huawei have not been as effective at inventing cool stuff as Qualcomm has been. And so what they couldn't do to get a leg up in the marketplace, they're using this Obama, antitrust lawsuit nonsense to bring Qualcomm down a peg or two in the hopes of having Huawei and Samsung respectively pass them, not by advancing themselves, but by dragging down Qualcomm.
And there have been a lot of lawsuits going on between all of those in Samsung and Huawei. Yeah, I've been kind of watching some of those and who owns this and who's suing on that. And
look, the domestic villain against Qualcomm is Apple.
Correct.
And Apple's iPhone without Qualcomm's inventions is a skinny rotary phone.
Correct.
And they've been suing for years now to try to get out from under the patent deals that they signed with Qualcomm. Now, to put this in financial perspective, the iPhone X costs $1,000.
Right.
On which Apple is contractually obligated to pay Qualcomm less than $20.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they've been filing lawsuits to not pay the $20. Then they got the Obama administration. They worked with the Obama administration on that lawsuit I mentioned at the outset, the January 17th, 2017 lawsuit filed by the Federal Trade Commission that unleashed all this holy hell all over the world. Then in April of last year, Apple just unilaterally announced, they have no court ruling in their favor, they just unilaterally announced, we're not going to pay Qualcomm anymore for the patents. We're still going to make the phones. We're still going to import the phones. We're still going to sell the phones all over the planet. We're just not going to pay Qualcomm for them. And they haven't been paying them now for almost a year. So I wrote at the time, I said, they should be arrested for the transportation and sale of stolen goods. Because that's what this is.
I remember
that's what this is. So that's the domestic enemy, the domestic villain in this is Apple, who started this. And of course, one of the reasons I brought this up is you're right. What's amazingly hypocritical about this is, of course, Apple holds patents too.
Mm-hmm.
on all their inventions. And guess what happens when someone steals their patents? They file lawsuits just like everybody else. Yes.
And you can't go up against an Apple. You can't go up against a Google. I mean,
that's what Google's approach to IP is. Try and stop us from taking it.
Yes.
What are you going to do? I was talking to a guy. I just drove back from DC, and this guy actually wrote the book on Google, Search and Destroy. His name's Scott Cleveland, and he said after the 2012 election, there was this watchdog company that was catching Google cheating and inflating their numbers to get higher ad dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Google bought the company.
That's what you do.
To shut them up. And by the way, the Obama FTC didn't find any problem with that merger. Oh, okay, no problem. So, yeah. So that's, again, you got, I love hearing Google and the net neutrality arguments. Oh my gosh, Comcast is so huge. If you add up the top 5 internet service providers in the country, as far as, market cap, they aren't as big combined as Google is.
Google, right.
Yeah.
There's also an implication on the biotech kind of segment to intellectual property too. So you got these big, huge biotech firms, which I would argue are also supported by, big pharma and whatnot, and you can't go up against them either, can you? No.
They get so big, and this is the problem: is they get so big. At some point, you have to say, okay, who can stop them? And that's why it becomes even more important and more for the government to protect intellectual property, and more dangerous when they don't. Because look, you and I are conservatives. I don't want the government regulating Google. I don't care that their market cap's over $800 billion. I don't want them regulating. What I want them to do is when they act in bad faith and they act, in violation of existing law. You have to, including, violation, stealing intellectual property. You have to enforce the law. And when you've got an administration like the Obama administration who didn't like IP and didn't protect IP and actively attacked IP, it was open season not just for the Obama administration, but for anybody who wanted to steal intellectual property here and all over the planet. And that, again, is another reason why we dropped out of the top 10 on the intellectual property scale.
Well, the fascinating thing is, even if the Justice Department went after Google and said, okay, Google, you're doing this, this, and this, and Google, okay, how much do you write a check for, and we'll put it in your slush fund and make it go away.
Yeah. And again, that's why, and I told that little story about the one little ad revenue company that was like, wait a minute, Google's ripping everybody off. Okay, we'll buy you. we'll buy you, no problem. And that's why that article, I don't know if you saw the New York Times article last week about all the fake Twitter followers.
Oh, yeah.
Why does Twitter allow that? Because they can charge more for their ads.
That's right. And Facebook's doing the same thing.
And Facebook is doing the same thing. That's exactly right. And all these fake profiles. And everybody listening here that has a Facebook account knows what we're talking about. You get this random, attractive woman asking to friend you with no mutual friends, and you're like, well, who is that? Well, that's part of the fake profile stuff that they build to then go to advertisers and say, this fake person lives in an area that you want to target with your advertising, so here's another person we're going to target in this area with your advertising.
And then when you boost the post, they get to decide who it gets boosted to, and they're charging you to do that. Yeah. Good
work if you can get it.
What's the solution here, Seton?
Well, God bless the Trump administration. Look, that guy campaigned over and over and over again on China's ripping us off. China's ripping off our intellectual property. China's not doing this right.
Correct.
And what's he done? Well, since he got into office, he's folded intellectual property protection into his trade negotiations. That's huge.
That's huge.
This is why I've said over and over and over again for years and years and years, the DC definition of free trade is fake free trade.
Yes.
The DC definition of free trade for decades now has been, we'll get rid of all the government impediments to our marketplace for you. You don't have to get rid of any government impediments to your marketplace for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, there was a video, I've linked to it a dozen times in pieces I've written. It was Donald Trump on Oprah Winfrey's TV show in 1988. And he was talking about it, and he goes, other countries don't let us sell our stuff to them. He goes, Oprah, try to go sell something in Japan. They won't let you. And that's the point. And that's 88. That was 30 years ago this has been going on in D.C. Mm-hmm. And so he's saying, everybody he put some tariffs on solar panels, of all things, solar panels, which are entirely government subsidized anyway, or else they wouldn't exist. And he put some tariffs on, and all the fake free traders freak out, and oh my God, he's a protectionist and all that. No, he's going to threaten tariffs. He's going to apply some tariffs in the interest of getting them to get rid of theirs, knowing full well that our marketplace is bigger than whatever other country we're dealing with. And they'll fold before we do. And before you know it, our tariffs are gone and more of their tariffs are gone. And we need to do that with every frickin' thing we sell on the marketplace, whether it's TVs, whether it's,
washing machines,
motors, dishwashers, clothing machines, crops, food, whatever it is. There's too much government on their end. And I'll give you another example really quickly. There are 100 countries, over 100 countries that sell sugar on the global market. Brazil controls half the entire market. How do they do that? They subsidize $4 billion per year, their sugar creation. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a domestic policy that obviously greatly warps the global marketplace. Now, we've got, look, I want to kill the farm bill here just like everybody else that's a conservative. But if you do it unilaterally, you're cutting your own throat. Because, by the way, and I wrote about this week, the EU in the mid-2000s said, we're getting rid of all our sugar stuff. We're not doing any more sugar stuff.
Right,
well,
right.
Brazil flooded the EU with sugar. They lost almost 100 sugar mills. They lost 200,000 jobs. And then when the domestic production was completely eviscerated, Brazil pulled back out, and they were paying 25% more for sugar than they were before the whole thing started.
I think that also happened with butter too, or something, didn't it?
I think so. Not butter, but something.
Yeah, something.
So anyway,
like that.
we can't. Our stupid farm bill has contributed to a stupid global marketplace. So rather than unilaterally disarming, we need to go to these countries and say, you get rid of that subsidy, we'll get rid of this subsidy. You get rid of that tariff, we'll get rid of this tariff. And get rid of all of this everywhere. And that's all that Trump's doing. He's saying, we've been suckers for decades because we open our markets and they don't open theirs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he's folded the intellectual property element, especially with China, because obviously we have a huge trade relationship with China, and they're the biggest intellectual property thieves.
Yeah, they're the worst.
He's folded that component rightly into the broader trade negotiations. God bless him for it.
So we can see that, out of the U.S. trade representative, the pressure really ought to be there, who I think is also participating in these, the NAFTA thing and these other trade deals, correct?
Yes. All of these things are being done through a prism, a trade perspective prism that we haven't had in D.C. in, like I said, in decades. And it's the right prism to be looking through. And finally, we're going to actually have free trade. He calls it fair trade. I say actual free trade. I mean,
he said reciprocal. Reciprocal. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If we're going to open up your market, our marketplace, you have to open yours. It's not absurd. It's not protectionist. It's not anti-free trade. It's actual free trade. I like the show 2.5 Men because the mom on the show is kind of like my mom, and there's Charlie, of course. Charlie Sheen is a drunk on the show. They basically cast him as himself, and he's drunk and he decides to cook and he makes hollandaise sauce, and he goes, hey, he goes to his brother, hey, taste this, and his brother goes, that is not hollandaise sauce. And and I just think of that with regard to this. That is not free trade. Look, do you like our free trade? That is not free trade. That is not hollandaise sauce. So, I mean, that's what we've been dealing with. We've got, again, and Trump's done this in 9 million different directions. He's walked into the middle of the room and gone, the emperor's naked. I mean, that's what he's done. He is the emperor. His is the emperor has no clothes administration, and the trade emperor in D.C. is naked too.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, trot on over there to lessgovernment.org, Seton Motely's website, because Seton, we hear about this free trade stuff all the time, and yet if you trot on over to CNN, they don't know what it is. If you trot on over to Fox, they're not explaining it. All we're doing is saying this is breaking, and Mexico's mad, or this is happening, and Canada's going to pull out. And so a lot of people don't necessarily, the business people might, but it has a big effect on government because of all the subsidies too, and it's government versus government. It's not necessarily person versus person. And so people don't necessarily understand where he was going with this reciprocal, free, balanced, even playing field trade deal. And I would say it's going to take, I don't know, probably another couple of years before some of this kind of levels out. Would you agree?
Although really quickly, I'll point out, in July of last year, the EU and Brazil came to the table and said, okay, we're open to discussing, rolling back our programs.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. I mean, that's 6 months into the Trump administration. All someone had to do from the United States was mention it and ask. Yeah. And they're already open to the idea, which means it was there for the taking. No one was offering to take it.
And it's kind of like the whole NATO thing. Nobody was taking as much of a hard line on it all as he was, and all of a sudden people started coming.
Pay your dues. Okay, we'll pay our dues. Well, that was tough. that was difficult.
All right, thank you, Seton. Good job. Come back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
More coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you this 24/7 stream of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. We are a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. If you're able, please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. Your donation will go a long way in helping us continue to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Hi, this is Captain Matt Bruce from the Captain's America Third Watch, and you're listening to Talk America Radio, the new dominant force in conservative talk radio.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia.
And Don Newen from Cowboy Logic Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go to sleep every night completely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place,
then you're simply not doing enough. Join us every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, for Cowboy Logic Radio.
let the restoration begin.
Donald Trump came to Washington vowing to drain the swamp and make government work for the American people. But the swamp creatures in D.C. aren't going down without a fight, and the deep state is determined to overturn the election and keep their gravy train rolling. In these turbulent times, it's critical for patriots to stay engaged and be prepared to defend this president. You can stay up to date on Trump's battle to make America great again by listening to America First Radio with Jim Dawes each weeknight at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Liberty Feed.
Hi, it's Mark Walters from Armed American Radio. You know, for nearly a decade, I've been educating, informing, and entertaining responsibly armed Americans. And during that time together, we've shared some ups and downs, haven't we? Trump's election saved our Supreme Court and no doubt the future of our gun rights for now. But now is not the time to lay down. The enemies of freedom are well-funded and more determined than ever. To keep up with the state of your gun rights, make sure to tune in to Armed American Radio right here on Talk America Radio, the new dominant voice in conservative talk radio.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience. When I'm not debating with Donna Fiducia about politics, I listen to Cowboy Logic Radio. Why, you ask? Because outside of my blog, founderscode.com, and my own radio show, the Denise Simon Experience, Cowboy Logic is by far the most entertaining and informative radio show on planet Earth. Plus, Don makes me feel guilty if I don't listen to his radio show every week.
You cannot retreat to your safe spaces. There are no therapy poodles allowed, especially when facing the truth. And that's just how we like it. Straight, hard, conservatarian talk, on the rocks, no chaser. Served up on the Adrian Slade Show. Small, limited government, constitutional conversations, exclusively on Talk America Radio. Every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. on Talk America Radio Liberty.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience, changing real gears here. I've got the distinct pleasure of having Jack Barksy with us. I've come to know about his story, and I have a friend of mine who had tapped Jack on the shoulder to do a radio interview, and I heard about it, so I tapped my friend and said, "You've got to introduce me," and he was kind enough to do so. So Jack is a German-American author. He has written a book called Deep Undercover. This is a man who lived a double life. He was an IT specialist and most of all a former KGB agent inside the United States. Quite the story. Has done a couple of big television appearances too. So Jack, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Okay, hello. Nice being with you. And you failed to mention I also was a bike messenger and a chemistry professor.
You are a busy man at one point. Jackie, there's 1,000 questions I want to ask, but most of all, I want to tell the listening audience that you can trot on over, and please do, to Amazon.com and grab this book because it is compelling. As a matter of fact, I've had a previous interview with Naveed Jamali, who too was lived a double life, and he gave you high praise for your book. So let me start off this way if I can. What is was the Soviets or Russian illegals program?
Well, I don't know I don't know much about the Russians, but I do know about the Soviet program simply because it's been documented by somebody who clearly knew about it, by one fellow named Vasily Mitrokhin, who was an archivist in the KGB archives, and he made copious notes with which he then appeared at British intelligence, and out came a book. It's called the Mitrokhin Archives, and he was talking about 3 waves of illegals. After it was next to impossible to recruit functional Americans, the first round of illegals were all Americans, communist sympathizers, members of the Communist Party, and so forth. And when in the early 50s, the Communist Party was pretty much demolished, that source disappeared, and also over time the attractiveness of communism as a recruiting tool just pretty much faded away. So now they would try to reestablish this kind of illegals network, and according to Mitrokhin, they tried it 3 times with a different set of numbers. I was supposedly in the 3rd wave, and again, Mitrokhin said there were about 10 of us. I just got introduced to a colleague, and I never knew, and I would always say, I don't know anybody else. But apparently there is another East German, ex-East German, who I'm going to meet when I go back to Germany to market the German version of the book, who claims that he was one of us. Okay, that'd be interesting. And I never knew. I never had context, by the way. I never knew. Nobody ever told me that. Oh, you're going to be part of this. This effort, or you're going to be part of a network. I was a lone wolf. I was trained in that vein, and I was never once given a thought that I might actually be part of a network.
You did this for what, 10 years?
10 years, yeah, just a little over 10 years, yeah.
In your estimation, Jack, would you think that these kinds of operations are still going on in earnest inside the United States?
Well, yes, they are. I don't know if you recall, in 2010, there were 5 couples arrested and eventually, I think, exchanged. That were illegals, yes. And they were Russian illegals. They were not Soviets. They were sent by Russia. And they were so poorly trained, and they were so bad.
Well, we were too.
Well, there's this mystique about almighty intelligence services, be that the CIA or the KGB. They're all these are organizations that have people in them, and people make mistakes, and sometimes the more people you have working on one thing, they all make a little mistake. Before you know it, it becomes a doozy. And so, yeah. So another, I bet you they're still trying this. I bet you there's some people here that are yet to be discovered. It's the bottom line is even though espionage is a lot of espionage is not very successful, but nations, if they can, will do it.
What was your particular mission? What was your objective in the United States?
The mission was fundamentally dual. Number one was to establish yourself as an American and live a life as an American, deeply buried in case we need you for something very special. I wasn't trained in explosive or weapons or anything like that. It was just in case we need arms and legs and a half a brain. It went no further. The other one was, and it was very, very generic, just get to know as many important, possibly useful people as possible, as you can, and, profile them, and we'll see what we can do with that information. Then I had a few special assignments, but that was it. I never had sort of a checklist. I never had I had one object that I was supposed to observe, but it was a little bit awkward because it was almost 100 miles from where I lived. But I never had a real checklist where it says, you got to do this, or you got to become an employee of that company and then find out that. It was very, very sort of like build it and they will come kind of an attitude. And I never questioned that. In hindsight, I find it a little bit odd, but I think that has a lot to do with the fact that they really didn't know what they were doing and what could be done. So they would hire themselves pretty smart, independently capable people and hope that they would come up with something on their own.
So if you were to necessarily kind of seek out some kind of people, get some information, send it back to the mother country, and if they thought that somebody came up on their radar that might be important, they would tap you on the shoulder again? No, that was not the case. I pretty much summarized to you what the extent of my spying. There was a little bit of industrial espionage involved. There was a couple of times where they asked me to go locate, actually 3 times, locate somebody who I had no idea why they would ask that information. One was in just north of Quebec City in Canada. One was in San Bernardino, and the third one was Atlanta, of all places. Interestingly enough, the one in San Bernardino, I actually saw face to face, and sometime later found out that they were trying to locate a defector who was still living under a death sentence. So that kind of stuff, and the reason that they would give me that stuff is because I could move around in the country freely and nobody would follow me. Whereas the diplomats and the folks with diplomatic cover were restricted, and if they ventured out of their restricted area, like I think it was 50 miles, they were subject to extradition, to being kicked out of the country. So there was some value in just being an quote unquote ordinary American. But again, I just told the German in my previous interview that I just had before talking to you, I said I had significant attacks of guilt because I felt I wasn't productive. I didn't get the big secret, and that sort of gnawed away at me a little bit. But they didn't seem to mind. They gave me the second highest decoration that the Soviet Union distributed in those days, the Order of the Red Banner, just a year prior to my quitting the job. When you communicated back to the motherland, how did you just do that? Can you describe that?
Oh, when I communicated primarily with using snail mail with secret writing superimposed on an open letter. It was like, secret writing is as old as mankind. You can use like things like lemon juice and write something on a piece of paper, and you can't see it until you heat the paper. And in this case, I had some special impregnated copy paper that, unless you knew what you were looking for, you wouldn't know that there's something wrong with that paper.
So you weren't using any kind of, radio equipment that they provided for you?
No, that was not considered safe anymore. They did that, and I know this was done into the 60s, where I actually worked with a couple of agents that operated in England specifically for one purpose only, to transmit information using a shortwave transmitter. And you had to put this thing someplace in the attic, and it was pretty sizable, and the whole it could be located, and that was a big weakness.
Yeah, I know Anna Chapman, the Cuban spy. She actually communicated via radio.
No,
Jack,
the communication coming my way was via shortwave. Yeah, but that's these are called number stations, right? A number station broadcasts, and there could be anybody within range of the United States or Canada who would actually who this was meant for, right? So that's not dangerous.
Jack, you mentioned the Matrokin files, which I think are actually stored in or hold residence in London. Is that right?
You're right. You know your stuff. That's correct.
I was doing a little cultivating, 5 or 6 months ago in those files, and your name is actually in there, correct?
Yeah, because that's how the FBI found me. Sure.
And tell the story about how the FBI, you came up on their radar through the Matrokin files, but then what happened?
Well, and then, so they had my name. And the reason I know all of this is because it's rather rare that a criminal or an agent, a foreign agent, becomes good friends with the organization that chased after him, and particularly with the lead agent in my case. So he sort of told me, without giving away any kind of secrets, how they got onto me. It was like, they got my name, and there are not too many Jack Barskys in the country, so they did a computer search, and they found maybe a dozen of us, and one of us got his Social Security card at the age of 35, and they said, bingo, that's got to be him. So then, now they knew two things. They had their man, and they knew that I was a very, very well-trained agent, because I'd been in the country for many years already, and I hadn't made any waves. So now they had to worry about, is he still active? If so, does he wake up occasionally? Does he run some agent in our government? Because both the FBI and the CIA had been burned badly by FBI, by Robert Hansen, and the CIA, Aldrich Ames.
Aldrich Ames. Mm-hmm.
Who were like the worst moles ever and did a lot of damage. So they were very careful investigating me. It took them about 3 years until they finally said hello to me.
And was your cover fully blown at that point? Did you have to kind of figure out what you were going to do? Were you going to live a new life? Were you going to ask for asylum?
Well, I had resigned from the KGB in 1988, and at that time decided not to defect. I just told the KGB I'm done. To make sure that they wouldn't retaliate against me or my family, I lied to them, and that lie worked really well. I told them that I had AIDS.
AIDS. Uh-huh.
Right? And that was a brilliant lie, because they bought it. So, and for the next 9 years until the FBI said hello. I lived a normal life. I actually had forgotten that I had a history in espionage because I became just a normal person. And so when the FBI said hello, initially I said, "Oh no, this is going to be the end. I'm going to go to jail, and my family, my wife will get deported, and my children become wardens of the state, maybe." But early on, it turned. There were glimmers of hope where it seemed to indicate, even though it was never promised me, that if I cooperate freely, that there might be a way for me to make this all good in some way. It took about maybe 4 months for that positive verdict to finally come down. I think the director of the FBI had to sign off on that.
So the FBI, when they tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Jack, how you doing?" Did they kind of give you some debriefing? Did they spend some time with you to say what was it like, what was happening, what were your assignments, where were you going, all those kinds of things?
Okay, so I'm assuming you were an experienced interviewer. Let me tell you something. I don't think you're as experienced or as thorough as these guys were. I spent literally several months, once or twice a week, initially every day, once or twice a week, and they asked me about every single detail of my life that I could possibly remember.
Twice, or
much
three
more
times.
than I can put in the book. And notes were taken. It was everything was extremely meticulous. At the end, Joe Riley, the lead agent in my case, knew more about me and remembered more about me than I did. So yeah, it was a most thorough debriefing. It was like actually not too bad for me, because for the first time I could openly talk about.
You were liberated.
Some stuff. Yeah, I could talk about what I had done. I'd never had that opportunity, not even to my the one German civilian who knew what I was doing and where I was, but my ex-German wife, I couldn't even tell her the details. Right? She didn't want to know. So yeah, it was a very, very thorough process. I don't know how many pages of notes eventually made it into the archives. And I bet you they're still pretty much classified. It takes, even though they had no problem with me writing my memoir, but
did you have to get your book cleared by the FBI?
No.
Interesting.
I asked ahead of time, and they said no, it's not necessary. And then they said, please do not use our names. And we're talking about some active agents, and so I didn't. But I went on 60 Minutes, and so did Joe Riley. So he had to get clearance, but I'm, as far as the FBI is concerned, I'm a private citizen and I'm not being supervised. I'm being supported in some way, not financially, but just in case something happens, they're keeping an eye on me to keep me safe.
When you were going through this debriefing, we mentioned the fact that you were somewhat liberated because you got to just get all this out. So this really says then, as a KGB covert operator, you were really living a very lonely, detached existence, weren't you?
You bet, yes.
And that took a big chunk of your life. You had a lot of making up in your life to do, correct?
Yeah. See, I had, for many years, even after I resigned from the KGB, I still wasn't really out of the closet. So I wasn't doing what normal people do. I didn't develop close personal relationships. And I didn't, I had friends and acquaintances and colleagues that I liked and interacted with, but I never had a real close friend. I made up for it. Now I have a few, but not that many, but 2 or 3 that are really close that I open up to. But in those days, you couldn't do that. Obviously, that stunts your emotional growth and maturity to some extent when you just can't share who you are with somebody else.
Well, I mean, you have to socialize in some form or fashion. I mean, it was a large personal sacrifice on your part. So, I'm guessing the conclusion is that you would not do it again or recommend it to others. Correct?
I would not recommend it to others. I actually had an opportunity once. A friend of mine asked me to speak with somebody who was in his last year in college, and asked me if I would recommend for him to join a particular organization. And I said it depends upon what you want to do for that organization. But if you want to do something that similar to what I did, don't do it. It'll damage you. There's no way that you can come out of this as a whole individual. It's not worth it.
And so there's a lot of regrets I'm hearing, perhaps. Is that right?
No, I can't regret the decisions that I made because they're not reversible. I can't. The decision. Here's what happened. The decision to join the KGB was made in good faith. I was absolutely, there was nothing selfish about it, even though it had a selfish undertone, but I was absolutely convinced that I was serving a good cause. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the problem. Once you're in it, once you're in the system, it's fundamentally, you're on a one-way street. Mm-hmm. And the moment I said yes, I was on that one-way street, and there were no more side streets to duck into. That was the end of that. So then, I have friends in East Germany, or now Germany, who made similar decisions to join the East German Secret Service. Well, once you sign up, it's just you can't turn back.
It's a lifetime decision.
Yes, and here's the thing. As a young person, who didn't have a mentor or a functioning father figure, mm-hmm. I wasn't quite aware of the momentousness of that decision. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I said, I signed up in good faith, and then I don't know what there is to regret afterwards, other than I'm the one thing I've always said I regret that I broke a promise to my German wife, and that is it's unforgivable. But I just had I had maneuvered myself into a situation where you come to a crossroads, and you take the left. The left in the fork, there is a swamp awaiting you, and you take a right, there's hellfire. So, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. There was no more good solution.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Jack Barksy on his book, Deep Undercover, who is a former KGB agent, and he's describing his life as such. We're going to come into a break, and on the other side, we'll get a little bit into what Jack thinks is necessarily happening now as he sees the headline. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We'll be right back.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
suppress, Mike Charlie 4 Tree 5 Niner 2-1, grid to Mark, Mike Charlie 4-7 Tree Niner 8 Niner out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks for staying with us, ladies and gentlemen. We've been speaking with Jack Barksy, the German-American former KGB agent, who is the author of a remarkable book titled Deep Undercover, and his double life. So I highly recommend that you trot on over to Amazon and grab this book. He operated inside the United States for 10 years. And so, Jack, thanks now for being a good American, by the way. And your life here is, did you expect it after you came to the United States and kind of decided that you were going to quit this mess and kind of move on? Did you expect your life here to be as rewarding as it has been?
Well, I did what I had to do. When I quit, I was a programmer. I made decent money. I made enough money to qualify for a mortgage, and that's when sort of the American dream started. But I had no vision for the future. I was just going to do my best to raise my daughter, and then a son that was born as well. And slowly I realized that I was actually pretty good. And then, what happens very often when in the marriage is that when the breadwinning spouse is encouraged by the one who possibly stays home or doesn't make as much money to do better. And so I got a little bit restless, and I worked on a career, and before you knew it, I became a chief information officer. So that's when I made some real money. That stopped.
I'm sure you're watching the headlines today, Jack.
Yep.
Such that we have all of these interferences, these foreign interferences, least of which, you mentioned in 2013 that we had a network of Russian spies that we swapped out for, I guess, an unknown number that were detained for various reasons in Russia. And then we closed at the end of 2016, we closed a couple of Russian dachas and compounds, if you will, and we expelled some Russians because of some crazy things. If you were to summarize what the Russians may be doing now with these activities, what kind of goes through your head?
I think they do whatever they can. There's a whole smorgasbord that of espionage and interference that fall under what the Secret Service could do into another country. The successors of the KGB. The KGB was dissolved and then became SVR, which is the equivalent of the CIA, and the FSB, the equivalent of the FBI. And then there's still the GRU, which never changed, which is military intelligence. They all do the same thing as the KGB did. They're not as well funded. Russia is not the Soviet Union. They're probably not as numerous, but they use the same methods with some technology upgrades. Like one of the biggest thing that we're currently subject to is what we call in the business active measures. Now, active measures really means to sow disinformation in another country, particularly like in the United States. Well, in the old days, the KGB used journalist. They would feed a story to somebody who was reasonably friendly, like maybe somebody with some socialist leanings, and would publish it in sort of a leftist newspaper. I don't know.
Like the New York Times.
Nowadays, maybe. And then from there, it would sort of make the rounds, and before you know it, it would be public knowledge, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. Things like that the Roosevelts were really innocent. Well, that was a total canard, but it was sown by the KGB.
Rosenbergs, you mean?
What did I say?
Roosevelt.
Oh, gee, I'm sorry. The Rosebergs, yeah. Or even more interestingly and more comedic to some degree is that people actually believed that J. Edgar Hoover was a secret cross-dresser. Mm-hmm. There was another one of those things. Now what they're doing, they're using the internet, and they troll the internet, and this is, there is nobody in their right mind who says that's not happening. Where the disagreements are, go ahead.
I was going to say thank you for saying that, because I feel like I'm the only one out here that is confirming all of that.
No, the only disagreement in the public realm is who colluded with whom, and I don't want to join that speculation.
Sure. This is necessarily what I call a higher level of hybrid warfare, if you will. Sure. It has taken the cyber realm and social media, which is come up from a modern day Gerasimov doctrine. Would that be right?
Yeah, it's as much as you can do to create a lack of trust in a system by the people who live in their system, the more you will weaken the system. And it doesn't take as much. of in terms of resources. And I've been saying this since I was first interviewed about this stuff, was almost a year ago, that our politicians are doing a phenomenal job helping out the Russian government.
I agree with that.
I mean, that Putin should pay him. I mean, this is ridiculous. Now we have this thing about the battling memos. Okay, so the Republicans write a memo, then the Democrats write a memo. This is what people think. This is not proof of any kind. So, and then, well, this can be declassified, and this can be, and this is just a bunch of nonsense where it's really all that it's all about is fundamentally keeping your job and staying in power or getting back in power. And it's the bottom line is that if we make foreign policy subject to politics, we're in deep trouble in this country.
Well, we've done that, and I'm glad you made that declaration. I would say that we've already certainly done that. I would also say that Putin and Medvedev and any of his other inner circles, interestingly enough, whatever they were doing and are doing, I think they're getting more success out of what they originally had planned than they ever imagined. Do you?
I believe you're right. This is what you do with with these active measures. You stick some doodle on the wall and hope it sticks. Well, a lot of that stuff stuck, and sometimes it wasn't even necessarily initiated by the Russians. This is the bad part. We just got to find a way to just attach bad, unpatriotic thinking to whoever we disagree with. That may well be the case in some situations, but this is now the norm that and then we call each other names and we're un-American and this and that. Wake up, people! Excluding the real fringe left and right, the left and the right have much more in common with each other than either one of us have in common with the Russians, with the Russian government.
Mm-hmm. So their tactics are much the same as we go back to the heart of the Cold War. We just have a wider battlefield now, I would say, because we have a such an easy time in global communications, and
Yep.
the chaos of disinformation and propaganda and media, such that you chase these things down and you work to find some shred of truth in it when there really isn't enough to get excited about. So we might be chasing the wrong things. Do you think so, Jack?
Well, yeah, I agree with you. The perimeter is much harder to defend because the perimeter is fluid.
Yes.
Okay, so this is, you know, in the old days, the border lines were drawn a whole lot more clearly. You know, the internet is everywhere.
Dangerous.
So, you know, so and the other thing is, you know, it's just the economy is fundamentally global. So, you know, we're talking about things like the insider threat. Well, how many multinational concerns do we have? All the big ones, or many of them are multinational. Well, that means you're going to have employees that may easily be serving in other countries. So there's a lot of problems here, and I honestly don't know where this is going. You know, there's almost the globalization of the world is a contradiction to what the historic nation state. And so you see that in Europe. You know, they started going a little more global, so to speak, on their own continent, and now you got countries trying to pull back from that because there's too much damage.
Let's discard targets if you can here for a second, which would be industry or academia or government. Did I miss any, are all of those and others targets of active measures?
Well, active measures is society against society. This is just a disinformation campaign. With regard to espionage, all of the above. Not so much academia, because academia shares information pretty freely, unless you have some researchers who are drawn into top secret kind of research. But it's government and obviously the military, that's part of the government, and industry, sure. Well, now the Chinese are probably the biggest stealers of industrial secrets, but that's not a secret either. So,
Jack, when you look at what Russia is doing today, for instance, their relationships with Iran or China or Afghanistan or Venezuela and Cuba and Pakistan, Syria too, for sure, and Africa. I would say that, they have some interest there, but they kind of they're always injecting themselves where they otherwise really have no interest, but they are injecting themselves for I would say a knight in shining armor kind of thing. See how we're not the bad guys at all. And they kind of are, aren't they?
Yeah, see, when you look at the history of Russia, there's a pattern that emerges from the very beginning of when that state was formed in the Middle Ages. It was always expansionary. It was always, and part of the reason for expanding was to extend the borders to deal with either the real or imagined threat from the outside. And so what happened then in 1920, I think it was 23 when the Soviet Union was formed, all of a sudden they had become a world power. And once they were nuclear, they were like equal to the United States. And now they all fell apart. They want it back. And believe me, I am convinced that it did not take Vladimir Putin to make Russia into what it is today. It was Russia that was looking for Putin. It is somehow in the DNA, in the Russian national DNA, to want to be an empire and to want to have a strong leader. And I'm not saying anything bad about Russians because I love Russian people, but as a collective, as a society, they're exactly what I just told you, and I'm not the only one who will say that.
Fascinating look at that. But yet there is a little bit of a growing faction where they're pushing back against the Putin-esque agenda, correct?
And that's the borders aren't as locked up as they used to be. So you have a certain number of people that have been studying in the West, that have worked in the West, and that are more in tune with liberal thought that is not part of the Soviet, the Russian heritage, but for that to take hold and actually take over, I think not in my lifetime. It will take generational changes.
But the oligarchs are taking advantage of all of that too, because a lot of them have moved their money out after what Putin was doing, essentially grabbing their companies back for power. And I would say, the United States has got an issue with Russia, but doesn't Britain have an even worse issue?
I believe so. You got a lot of oligarchs living there and living in great wealth, and the Brits are trying to clamp down on some of those guys if they can prove that their gains are ill-gotten. You bet. And with the oligarchs is an interesting set of people, because the ones that are currently living in Russia and operating freely are clearly part of Putin's inner circle. You cannot operate in Russia without Putin's approval. The ones that manage to flee and take some of their wealth to England primarily, well, they're a different brand, but
they could end up dead, or they need a security team.
That's a good point. And I tell you what, the ones that are living in Russia, I bet you they have vast amounts of money stored outside of Russia, simply because they can't rely on the fact that they will always have, this is an unstable situation. So you want to have your money in the United States or in Switzerland or some other place. That's why the Magnitsky Act is playing such a great role. Yep.
Bill. He and I chat from time to time. So.
You do? I mean,
yes,
when I was really dismayed that when Bill testified, it was at the Senate.
Yes.
That somehow there was some other news that
yes.
didn't give him the exposure that he deserved, because he spoke the truth as I believe it is the truth. I read his book, and it's again, follow the money. Where's the money? What is you got a bunch of thugs ruling a certain country, and what are they after? I want to make sure that they retain that wealth.
So if we were to put you in a congressional hearing and you had 5 or 6 minutes that you wanted to convey a message to the legislative branch or to any committees or even to the White House, Mr. Jack, what would it be? What would your 5-minute summary be?
I would want to take the fifth.
Well, we've had a lot of that here lately too, haven't we?
No, but seriously, this is just. I don't know what message would ring true with the majority of folks that are running our government today. So I would want at least a large percentage of them to resign and go away, and not acting like they have to defend this feeding trough that they are all lined up. The bottom line is, that most everybody who starts in Congress with no money resigns from Congress with a lot of money. How does that work? and so, I honestly, I wouldn't know what to tell them. I'm not saying there aren't honest, good people serving in Congress. I think there are. But if the organization itself is corrupt, you can't operate within it unless you play by those rules. Therefore, I probably wouldn't have anything to say. God help us. I mean, we.
You back to the fifth, taking the fifth again.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but
No, I get it. These hearings are really quite remarkable. There are some people that they do bring in as witnesses that are giving some incredible, accurate, chilling testimony. And yet these members of Congress don't feel compelled to jump out of their seats and go take some serious action. I mean, they just kind of like, yeah, okay, active measures this and active measures that. And so I would argue that 2 years from now or 5 years from now is going to look exactly like today. Would that be a true statement, Jack?
I believe that to be the truth. I heard somebody say, it's not an original thought of mine, but it rang true with me. Government is really not there to solve your problems. Government is its primary interest in making sure that problems persist. So
there's
that
money in it.
They can pretend to go ahead and solve them. Mm-hmm. It's just a fundamental law of self-preservation. A bureaucrat. If you work for a company and you have a department, and all of a sudden the work for your department goes away, so what are you going to do? Go away? No, you invent something else.
Do you have
that's
another?
How government grows.
Jack, do you have another book in you? We need you to write another book.
My agent says so too, because.
See.
But I'm not saying anything that hasn't been said by others. So
but you know what? It comes from a very unique perspective from someone like you. Yeah, you bring a different set of eyes to all of this.
Take a look at my website. I have a blog, which isn't a real blog, because it's not frequently added to. But I have an essay there on the growth of the American government, and I really truly mean what I wrote in there. And I'm afraid of sizable organizations. That includes, by the way, Google, Amazon, Facebook, but the American government is possibly the biggest organization on the planet, and there was a good reason that the founding fathers and the Romans, by the way, devised a government system where the powers are divided, and we got some overlap now, which I don't like at all. And when a Supreme Court judge makes political statements, that gets really scary.
Well, what is your blog? What is it? Is it?
It's at jackbarksky.com.
Jackbarksky.com. Okay.
Yeah, it's a website, and there's a blog in it.
And your book, ladies, the book we're speaking of is Deep Undercover, and he's doing a German version. So you're heading to Europe soon.
The German version, I like the title better. It's called The False American, or Phony American.
Phony American.
Yeah, the Phony American. The phony American will go over there and speak halting German. So what? Then there's nothing genuine left in me.
We're very, very grateful for your time here today on the Denise Simon Experience, and I'm going to call you back because you have a very unique perspective on things, and the context of what you describe here is spot on, I would argue. And congratulations for the success of the book and being with us. I mean, and we're very, very gratified for your patriotism now.
Well, I would hope so. I bought into this experiment, and I hope it will stay healthy, recover, and lead the rest of the world into freedom, which is something.
Equilibrium.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack. Ladies and gentlemen, the more coming your way. Stay with us.
Hi, thank you for listening. My name is Ron Phillips, and I'm the owner and operations manager of Talk America Radio. It is with great pride that I offer you this 24/7 stream of some of the finest talk radio programming in the country, but I need your support. We are a listener-supported network. That means we need your help to continue to offer the quality programming you're hearing right now. If you're able, please visit talkamericaradio.us and click the Support Us button. Your donation will go a long way in helping us continue to share the American voice. Thank you.
This is Don Newen, co-host of the Drive Time Sit Rep. Join me as I call in to my Intel analyst, Denise Simon, for my daily situation report, or Sit Rep, the Drive Time Sit Rep. Check talkamericaradio.us for more information and show times.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience. When I'm not debating with Donna Fiducia about politics, I listen to Cowboy Logic Radio. Why, you ask? Because outside of my blog, founderscode.com, and my own radio show, the Denise Simon Experience, Cowboy Logic is by far the most entertaining and informative radio show on planet Earth. Plus, Don makes me feel guilty if I don't listen to his radio show every week.
You're listening to your local news source, WLBB, News Talk 1330 and FM 106.3.
KTA Digital Dallas. Talk America Radio. Simulcasting on WDDQ, Talk 92.1, Adel, Valdosta, Georgia, and WJHC, Talk 107.5, Jasper, Florida.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Gonna sort of switch gears from chatting with Jack Barksy, and that is that we've got John Guandolo with us. John is a former Marine, was with the FBI at one point, and now he is the founder of Understanding the Threat. And they've been good enough from time to time to actually give some testimony before Congress. So, John, thanks for your good work, and thanks for being with us here on the Denise Simon Experience.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me.
You know, there's been a lot of reporting, but it you have to kind of go find it. We got this cat up here in Michigan who was apparently a doctor, very, very involved in healthcare at one point. That has decided that he wants to run for governor of Michigan. And from what I can tell, he's he wants a single payer system. He wants to legalize pot. But, you know, he has a Rhodes Scholarship, or at least he says he does. I haven't looked for confirmation on that. But interestingly enough, he also seems to be a buddy of Bill Clinton. At least he came up on Bill Clinton's radar, where they had a little personal discussion where Bill Clinton said, "Hey, why don't you run for office?" And this fella is Abdul El Sayed, and he would in fact be, from what I can tell, the first Muslim to run for a higher office. Did I get all that right?
You did. Sounds like you got so far so good.
Good answer. Now, he filed this is a little on the concerning side here, John, because he filed a gubernatorial campaign finance summary, and it looks like it was filed in July of last year. And it's supposed to take him up through the election cycle of November 6th of 2018. What's a little concerning is he came right out of the chute with over $1 million in his campaign funds. Is that a little bit of a situation that might raise an alarm or two?
Well, I think before we can have the discussion about this one individual, I think for your listeners, the foundation has to be laid of why there's even a red flag going up, and there are a number. Does that make sense? Can we do that?
Yeah, please.
So if we look at the Islamic movement in the United States and the Islamic community in the United States, as we have detailed, Understanding the Threat, my organization has detailed, because we know this from evidence and internal documents from the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood, that as the Muslim Brotherhood established itself here in the United States, they literally created the Islamic community here. So it wasn't random Muslims that came to America. It was very heavily guided by the Muslim Brotherhood, and we have documents and historical records that have been seized by the FBI in raids here in the United States, as well as information we have that's been seized in raids overseas, as well as historical documents about the Brotherhood. And there are a few things I just want to state. The Brotherhood's objective in their own bylaws is to establish an Islamic state, a caliphate, under Islamic law, Sharia. That's in their bylaws, and you can get a copy of their bylaws at our website, understandingthethreat.com, at our resources page, in case somebody's not aware of that. That's the same objective, establishing Islamic State under Sharia. That's the same objective as Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, and the other, primary terrorist groups, if you will, but jihadi groups in the United States, which is one of the many reasons they should be designated a terrorist group. The terrorist group, the designated foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. government, Hamas, is an inherent part of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not an outgrowth or an offshoot. It is the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood. So they are a dangerous organization. They created, by and large, and built the Islamic community here in the United States. And as a matter of anecdotally, besides all the evidence, anecdotally supporting that, well, when I've been at the military war colleges or National Defense University and have met colonels from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey, unanimously, they've, without me even asking, but when they knew that I understood the Brotherhood and their movement, they've volunteered, and I don't consider any of those countries, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Turkey, none of those are our allies. Our leaders may call them our allies, but they are not our allies. And yet their officers had volunteered to me, hey, the Muslim Brotherhood is a much stronger concentration and control here in the United States than they do in my country, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. And my response was always the same. Yes, I do know that. But thanks for, just giving me a little more weight on the scale. So that's the first part. The second part is we know, again, from evidence in the largest terrorism financing trial in American history, the United States versus Holy Land Foundation, which is adjudicated in Dallas, Texas in 2008. What we know is that the most prominent Islamic organizations in the United States are a part of the Muslim Brotherhood's movement, whose stated objective, the way that they're going to establish the Islamic State under Sharia is, and these are their words, by waging civilization jihad to destroy Western society from within and to destroy our house, sabotage our miserable house by our hands and the hands of the believers. They want to get our leaders to do their bidding for them. Now, if people don't understand that or they think that's not possible, that's fine. But what we can do is track in the last 40 to 50 years that they've done exactly what they said they were going to do. And as of today, we're in a very, very dangerous situation domestically here. And your government, in the last 8 years, overtly aided and abetted our enemies here domestically. The previous administration, the Bush administration, did not do much to thwart what they were doing here. And now this administration has started to turn the tide, but they are not seeing that the very leadership of all the prominent organizations are the problem. And these are the people our government relies upon at the State Department still, and at other branches of the government to give them advice on how to fight the war and create domestic terrorism strategies. The evidence, two quick pieces of evidence: we lost the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan despite the fact our military crushed the enemy on the battlefield. And the reason we did is because we don't understand this threat. Our government, the State Department, wrote constitutions in Iraq and Afghanistan creating Islamic republics under Sharia. Sharia is Islamic law. It's obliged for all Muslims because it comes from the Quran and the example of the Prophet Muhammad. And all Sharia mandates warfare against non-Muslims until the entire world's under an Islamic state under Sharia. That is the framework I think we need to have before we can have this discussion about this one individual. Because we can go back to the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and what we see is Muslims who are inside the government, Muslims who are advising at the senior level, at the cabinet level position, and even the Muslims that control the invitation list for the iftar dinner at the White House, by name, we can identify them as being Muslim Brotherhood leaders. You don't get to run for governor of a state as a Muslim, if the MB is not putting their stamp of approval.
Right.
I can tell you right now. So even if he is not a Muslim brother, and there is evidence to suggest he may be, it doesn't matter. You don't get to be in that position unless you're ideologically aligned with them. And for people who don't understand that, they simply don't understand how the Islamic movement works here in the United States. And thank you for giving me that time.
No, that's good. That's good. We've had these kinds of discussions on the Denise Simon Experience, but from time to time, since we cover, hundreds and hundreds of topics, a refresher is good. So, certainly thank you for that. But I was quite struck to kind of dovetail what you just said, is that he's already received endorse and support from Linda Sarsour, and also Ro Khanna, who at one time worked for the Obama administration. So with those two endorsements, it does start to be a dog whistle, if you will. I don't like that expression, but we'll use it. And then as I started to say, he came out of the chute last year with $1 million already, and he's already had up to $2 million, according to his, financial filing for his campaign. So I find it rather curious that he would have those kinds of funds available to him already. Has there been some kind of peek around to see where those monies have come from, John?
We have not done research on that, but again, if this is like other folks that we've seen in the United States, this money is coming. First of all, we have to understand. I think from the perspective of the founders, a Muslim can't be governor. Let's start with that. And so for people who are falling out of their chairs right now, you just got to go back and read what the founders said, what the Congress has said about the founding era. And there was a 1854 report from the Congress, from the Judicial Committee actually, when a group of Americans petitioned to have the chaplains removed from the U.S. government. In other words, most people probably are not even aware of this, but chaplains, there was a call to remove chaplains from the U.S. government, from the military and inside the U.S. government. And I think it's important that people understand these things. It's amazing. And let me just for a moment read. So what the Congress did was they literally did a year-long, this is in 1853, they did a year-long study of the founding era to determine if they should remove Christian chaplains from the U.S. House and Senate and from the military. And this is what they said. This is a quote, and I'll give you the date on this. This is 1854, inside the U.S. Congress, and the title of this is Chaplains in Congress and in the Army and Navy. March 27th, 1854. Had the people during the Revolution had a suspicion of any attempt to war against Christianity, that revolution would have been strangled in its cradle. At the time of the adoption of the Constitution and the amendments, the universal sentiment was that Christianity should be encouraged, but not any one sect. Any attempt to level and discard all religion would have been viewed with universal indignation. The object was not to substitute Judaism or Mohammedanism or infidelity, but to prevent rivalry among sects of Christians to the exclusion of others. And then you've got John Jay, the first Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, saying this, quote, "Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers." Why? Because the foundational principle of the United States is the law of nature, and the law of nature is God. That's the foundation of our entire legal and governmental system. Law of nature being legally defined as the will of God, and the law of nature is God, legally defined as Holy Scripture in Blackstone's commentaries, which is the most cited source by the founders in the writing of the Constitution, second only to the Bible. So when we look, and by the way, that Blackstone's commentaries was the law book used in U.S. Law schools, including Yale and others, for the first 150 years of our republic. So this is not just, I'm not throwing out some hearsay. So when we understand that, the reason the founders said that Christians needed to be in those positions of government, how could you be a judge and rule on a law, which, by the way, no law can be made that contradicts the law of nature and nature's God, according to the law that the founders used at the time of the founding. And so how can a judge rule on a matter of law? How can anyone in the executive branch, a president, a governor, enforce laws? And how can a legislature at the state or federal level create laws, and yet their entire belief is contrary to the very founding of the laws they're supposed to enforce? That's why the founders said you can't do it. So this idea that you can have a Muslim governor in the United States is outrageous, but I think it's because Americans have been told by their leaders for so long, and American pastors have been cowardly silent for so long, that they haven't actually spoken truth about what Islam is. That Islam, the system, mandates war against non-Muslims. 100% of Islam does. There's no such thing as a version of Islam that doesn't. And understanding the threat offers $1,000 to anybody that can show us a version that does, because it doesn't. And we've been doing this for years, and nobody, not even the Muslim Brotherhood or imams or Islamic scholars, have taken us up on it, because they know what we're talking about is airtight. And so this idea that there's this version of Islam that doesn't subscribe to this, and when you can demonstrate that that's what Islam is, that it is simply that ISIS and Al-Qaeda have never been wrong about the requirements of Islam. And I challenge anybody to show us where they've been wrong. Where is there any teaching in Islam that says warfare against non-Muslims not obligatory under the conditions that are set forth in Sharia from the Quran and the example of their prophet Muhammad? Their prophet, who the Quran calls a perfect example of a man, the most, quote, beautiful pattern of conduct for all Muslims for all times. the guy that tortured and beheaded Jews and killed and gave permission for people that mocked him to be killed and had sex slaves and married a 6-year-old, all of those things, that's the perfect example. So when you see this behavior by ISIS and the Islamic and Al-Qaeda, they're doing exactly what he said. And so to say that a man who publicly says that's my belief structure could be the governor of a state in the United States is absurd, and it defies all logic. But because so many people have lost their nerve and their stomach to speak truth, we're allowing this. We're allowing it, and anybody who steps forward, there people are afraid, well, I don't want to get called names. Oh, you don't want to get called names? Wow. I mean, the cowardice is just astounding. I mean, go somewhere else. Go be a citizen somewhere else, because you don't have the right to be a citizen here. Honestly, being a citizen comes with duties in this country. And if you're in a position of leadership, you have a legal duty to do something about this. If you're a citizen and you're scared, just go back to your home. I still think you should leave this country if you're not willing to defend it. And as a combat veteran, it sickens me. But I'll even give you a pass, anybody. But if you're a leader, you've sworn an oath to protect and defend. You have a duty and a legal duty to know all enemies or do a due diligence to know all enemies. This is an easy enemy to know. You just got to pick up the stuff, read what Islam is, and it's known. Hell, pick up a 7th grade textbook in any Islamic school in America, and guess what they teach? They teach what ISIS teaches. Isn't that shocking? I mean, this is the level of cowardice that we are witnessing right now, and quite frankly, the silence by many citizens. It's going to be our downfall. But I believe we can turn this around, because I believe Americans are getting to their breaking point, even with this president.
And so, as a dovetail to that, John, why have we not declared the Muslim Brotherhood a terror organization in the United States?
Well, maybe because the very people advising the leadership of the State Department, the CIA, the FBI, the DHS, and the national security staffs are Muslim brothers. Maybe because we have a national security advisor that says that what ISIS is doing is a, quote, perverted version of religion and has nothing to do with Islam. That could be one part of the reason.
I just happened to write about the Muslim Brotherhood yesterday, as a matter of fact. Now, this cat, Abdul El Sayed, his family is actually from Egypt, correct? Which is the home base of what? Ding, 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 the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes, and we certainly have anecdotal information. We're trying to nail more down with some sources in Egypt that his family is supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I'm not willing to publish that yet until we get more detail. But I mean, the fact that, at an ISNA conference, which you just mentioned, ISNA being the largest Muslim Brotherhood organization in North America, Linda Sarsour, who is Hamas, comes from a Hamas family, stands there and supports this guy. Well, that's at least a data point that we should pay attention to.
Exactly.
Because do you think that Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood would support a Muslim for elected office if he didn't believe in their objectives of establishing an Islamic State under Sharia? No chance.
John, I've been a snot about this for quite some time, and 3 or 4 months ago, I was actually with, actually a little bit longer than that, Sebastian Gorka, while he was still working in the White House, and I said, I'm calling for a full declassification and publishing of the Holy Land Foundation trial documents, which I'm sure you have too. Why are we not done that? We've had a year and a month to do that. Well, what are we waiting on?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what this Department of Justice is doing. They could have indicted CARE, ISNA, and Nate a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and it hasn't been done yet. So that's why the work we do, we make clear to people this war is going to be won or lost at the local level. We're the only, Understanding the Threat is the only organization in America giving citizens and local and state law enforcement tools to identify and map out the jihadi networks in their local communities. And we're the only ones giving police investigative tools to go after them and prosecute them. And we are the only ones in the country who are giving state leaders a strategy to dismantle these networks at a state level. We're also the only ones in the entire West that run a week-long training program to take people who understand the threat to a much, much deeper level about the nature of the threat, how to teach it and defend against it as you're teaching it. So there's a lot we're doing that's having a heavy impact in this counter movement, which is why we take so much heat from groups like Hamas Doing Business as Care, the Brotherhood, Southern Poverty Law Center, and all the usual suspects.
Well, actually, you may not be aware of this. I actually wrote about this today. We have this cat by the name of Naif Abu Aziz Al-Falash that was just arrested in Oklahoma, Weatherford, Oklahoma. Now, why would we do that? Because out of apparently the Abbottabad documents and other documents, we actually found his fingerprints on an application to join Al-Qaeda. And in 2016, he got his pilot's license. He's in Oklahoma. And he was, the application went into the Al Farouk training camp in Afghanistan. So I would argue that with you on the case that they're here. And certainly when it comes to a Saudi, because he is a Saudi that just got his pilot's license. Don't you feel good about that, John?
Well, this is just one. It's much worse than that.
I know it is. I know it is. I'm just throwing it out there that there's something that just happened in the last couple days.
Literally in the last. I think the first report. Let me see here. New York Times just put out the article 5 hours ago.
There you go.
Yep. So.
And he came here on, interestingly enough, a non-immigration visa, which means, I'm just traveling, just passing through.
Yep. Just hanging out, just having fun.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, trot on over to understandingthethreat.com. And there you can read about Mr. John Guandolo and all the good work that he is putting out there. He and his team are putting out there. They're trying to send out the clarion call here, and we need to be paying attention because we've got a situation that's happening right under our noses in Michigan. John Guandolo, thanks for being here on the Denise Simon Experience. Come back.
Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us. We'll see you again soon.